Yes, we have.
All right, looks like recording is in progress. All right, folks, so I'd like to welcome you to the FRC History presentation. Just going to start out with a brief introduction about myself. The real things to take away here is I've been doing FRC for a long time, which really doesn't mean anything other than I've been doing it for a long time. And right now I am the producer slash host of Peach Pit, right, which is sort of a FRC little talk show where we talk about robots and things like that. And yeah, so hopefully we're going to look at a previous game. We're going to learn a little bit and we're going to have a little bit of fun. So let's see here. Okay. Now, I think the first question is, why do we care about FRC history, right? Why, this is about STEM, this is not a history organization. So, and at a very basic level, you have to understand that games repeat themselves, right? And sometimes not even the whole game will repeat, but you'll have mechanisms that repeat, you'll have, game objects that'll repeat. And so knowing how games are played in the past, knowing which mechanisms were popular in the past, it'll really help you competitively right now. And there's another layer to this that, when you have games every year, there's some drama, right? There's some, things that happen. There's some robots that are very cool. And I think as much fun as you have with your own teammates, I think it's really fun to know these stories, know these dramas and the happenings from year to year. So actually, if you look on the right-hand side, you'll see two robots for Team 1114. Now, the robot on the right, the bigger one, is from 2008. And that year, it was an amazing robot, definitely one-of-a-kind design. Now, if you look on the left, the robot they built in 2014, it had a similar kind of game object, but they look very similar, right? So 2014 had a bit of an advantage that year. But what you may not see is that in 2014, there were a lot of other robots that had this style of design. So 971, 118, 1986, and hopefully you know some of these really popular names, that they all drew inspiration from 1114's 2008 robot. So, things do repeat themselves, and if you have this context, if you know your history, you're going to be better prepared for any game going forward. Now, for this presentation, I really only have time to go through one game, right? And I think the question is, which game are we going to go through? And the answer, you might have been able to figure it out, is 2010 Breakaway. Now, I think this game is really interesting, but before we get to the game, I want to set the stage a little bit, right? How long ago was 2010, right? Some of you might have actually been, I think, in elementary school or even younger at the time. So let's set the scene, right? So in 2010, the Peachtree district did not exist, right? And we were still 6 years away from districts ever existing. We only had one competition, and that was the Peachtree Regional. And if you wanted to go to another event, you had to go out of the state. So you either had to go north to Clemson, or you had to travel around or go to Texas or go to Florida, right? Many of you know East Cobb Robotics, right? They're a very, very dominant team right now, but East Cobb Robotics doesn't exist yet. And they still won't for 4 more years, right? And the last thing is, I'm pretty sure everybody has seen Kyle MC events, and you've maybe seen some of his presentations. But Kyle's still a junior in high school, right? This year was actually the first year that the Dean's List Award was handed out, and Kyle was one of the first winners, right? So I think it's interesting to think about just how long ago that was, how different the district was. And so when you think about some of the robots that we see, you really have to keep that in mind. Another interesting point was that Vex Pro just did not exist at the time, right? So definitely a very different time. But let's take a look at the game, right? So I'm going to switch to video, and wrong video. Of course, we're going to be talking about 148, so just queued that up. All right, I'm going to play the video, and please post in chat or the Q&A if you have any problems, okay? All right, we're back. So hopefully that was a little bit of an interesting look. Now, this is where if we were doing this, for an actual season, we might stop, read the game manual, do the whole breakdown. But I'm going to throw some major considerations at you guys right now, right? Um, and the first thing is that it was difficult to control soccer balls. You could not bring them into your robot. The 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 soccer balls couldn't enter more than 3 inches into your frame perimeter. And even if somehow you managed to control it, you couldn't bring it up above your bumpers. So you like really have to kind of work on dribbling the soccer ball, right? Um, and you know, the second major consideration is that these like bumps that you see spanning the field, these things are massive, right? I don't think we've seen anything this big, but nowadays all the bumps you see are usually carrying wires. They're rather small. These things are 13 and a half inches tall, and they're only 11 inches wide, sorry, 12 inches wide at the top. So it is very difficult to kind of, jump up, get yourself stable, and come back down. It was kind of a rough crossing, right? And you had to design for this. Um, Next major consideration is that balls were returned to the middle of the field using those like tracks that we saw. So nowadays, a lot of the balls are behind human player stations. They're in dedicated loading zones. Oftentimes, these loading zones are safe zones. That wasn't the case here. If you scored a ball, it went back to the middle where it was a free for all. Um, Next consideration is climbing, right? So there's always climbing. Now remember, the first robot that climbs, you have to climb so that your robot is above that platform that's like on that climbing structure. The second robot that climbs um, just has to be off the ground but supported by another robot, right? So that's like sort of the difference in what made one thing easier or not. Now the last major consideration was really with the ranking system. Now what you really need to know is that if a team won, instead of getting 2 points for winning or 0 points for losing, what they got was the winning team's score plus 5 bonus points for winning, and if you lost, you just got the winning team's score, right? It's a very weird and kind of unique system that we haven't seen ever since this game because it was a little broken in a way. But it's very important to understand that your ranking score was based on the score of the winning alliance, right? So that'll be key when you think about your strategizing and thinking about some of the situations that you're in. Now, this is where if you're watching this asynchronously, right, and you're watching this on YouTube or you're watching it again with your team, I would encourage you to try and take a pause, right, and go through a little bit of brainstorming. Think about the strategies that you're going to be going out there with. What kind of mechanisms might you put together, right? How are you going to tackle this game? And the one question that I have for you guys is very specific: is can you break this game, right? There is, and the reason I ask is because there is a way to break the game. And so we will talk about that robot, a little bit later. But is there something you can do that makes scoring, defending just absolutely dominant? And the answer is yes, but I want you to think about it. Okay. Now we're going to get right into it, and we're going to start with 148. Right? Of course, we're going to start with 148. But this robot has a lot of unique aspects and mechanisms that we honestly sometimes even see today. So let's actually go ahead and watch their release video from that year. I'm going to go to 148, and I'm going to start the release video now. All right. So we're back. So that was that was a lot to take in, right? You would think that after like 15 or so years watching these teams release their robots, it's still it's still pretty awe-inspiring every time, right? So I cut the video a little short, but I think you got the idea. It was a pretty good robot. So let's take a look at some of its components, right, and how they sort of tracked over the years. So the first thing you probably noticed, and the first thing that I noticed and was like, what's like really going on there was their drivetrain, right? Now nowadays you see kind of like the Octanum shifting drive modules quite a bit, but back then this was the first time anybody was seeing it. And if you can't tell, what's happening is that 148 is shifting their entire drivetrain between styles, right? So they're not just shifting speed; they're going from an all-traction drivetrain, and they're actually physically shifting their modules so that they go from all-traction to a H drivetrain, which is one of the omnidirectional styles of drivetrains, right? So this idea was so new and so revolutionary. I mean, this was the first team to do it. They literally patented the idea, so that's got to mean something. And nowadays, you can buy the modules directly from Vex. You see a lot more implementation using mechanism wheels, right? So on one module, you'll have your traction wheels or like one configuration. And then on another configuration, you'll have your mechanism wheels, so you can move around and things like that, right? So this is something that they started that's definitely caught on over the years, and nowadays it's decently popular, right? Now, this next thing that you might have seen was how they controlled the soccer ball, right? And essentially what they did was they had two rollers, sort of like horizontally oriented, but that they could pinch the ball. And that allowed them to really grip the ball very tight, but still keep it like majority outside of the robot. And, that was sort of the key, right? I think we can all agree that every year there's like a key or two that you have to be able to do this, or you have to have used this mechanism, or else your robot's not going to be competitive. That year, getting that pincher intake was the key. And 148 was sort of the team that broke it to the rest of FRC, right? And so many teams that year, they came out and they had their own systems and they were trying to, maybe roll the ball back towards them. But as soon as you saw the pincher, you had an exodus of teams sort of, how do we get these pinchers on our robots? And, I can speak from experience on 1261, when we went to our first event, we had a system that used, suction cups, and it worked okay. But with suction, one of the challenges is that you have to line up just right. But between our first regional and our second regional, we actually rebuilt our entire front end of our robot. And so we actually added the pincher, and I think that was one of the key things that allowed us to win our second event, right? That year, 1771 back then used even more wood on their designs than they do now, which I know, but they were also using suction, and they also made the transition to this pincher design. So it was, we on 1261 use a lot of 80/20, so it was challenging for us, but not that hard. If you think about, you're having to cut up, your chassis, you're having to cut up your wooden mechanisms to make room for this. It was definitely challenging for 1771 as well. Now, the last component of 148's robot was actually that there were two of them, right? Now, 217, the Thunder Chickens, at this time, they were one of the big powerhouses in first. And nowadays, they're not as notorious as we've like gone into districts and we've kind of insulated. But, 217 was a huge team back then. And so to see 148 217 come out and say, hey, we built the exact same robot, it was a little crazy. It would be like if 148 and 118, or like 148 and 254 today were like, hey, we built this crazy robot, and oh, by the way, this other amazing team also built it, right? So that was really sort of an interesting thing to see, right? So this robot sort of broke ground on quite a few fronts, and I think it was one of the most notable robots of this year. Now, if you remember, at the beginning of the presentation, towards the beginning, I asked you, can you break the game, right? Can you do something to sort of make scoring or defending just extremely dominant? And turns out that there was a team that broke this game, right? So we're going to watch their match video, and we'll take a look. So the team we're going to keep an eye on is 469. They are in the lower middle of the playing field, so you can see they're kind of big and tall. And we're going to watch just a few seconds of the match and kind of keep an eye on what they end up doing and how they work, okay? Okay. So hopefully in the video you caught what 469 was doing, right? Now, this is, I think, one of the greatest sort of game-breaking designs that we've ever seen in FRC, right? I think the only other one that probably compares and would probably be better is 71 from a few years before this. But what 469 did was that they had this sort of upper structure that would take soccer balls as they were coming back on that ramp, and they would sort of grab those balls and like reroute it down to their goals. Now, in that match, 217 was doing a pretty decent job blocking the balls from going to the goals. But if there was nobody blocking, or if the blocker couldn't keep up, then you can imagine they have some amazingly high scores, right? And the reason this was considered legal was because 469, just by the lawyering of the rules, they weren't technically manipulating the balls with their structure, right? Their structure was mostly very static, right? So once a ball hit their structure, they didn't move anything. So that's how they were able to work the rules so that their rerouting of the soccer balls was actually legal, right? And they would inspire a couple of copycats, but nobody was ever as effective or as sort of intricate as what they were able to put together. Now, they did make a time sign. Unfortunately, they were eliminated. But I think this is one of those designs that anybody who knows about it, they sort of inspire people to think about, okay, how can I break this game? How can I think like 469 and build something that's so dominant that other teams really can't do much about it, right? Now, every year, there's like multiple robots that sort of do their thing, and it's all very fascinating. So on the left-hand side, you can see Team 67, right, the hot team. And their sort of call to fame for this year was their climber. Now, they had a passive climber, which was just a bunch of surgical tubing wrapped around a big drum, and when they wanted to climb, they would just release the tension. And so they could climb, and the key for that is that after they released the tension, they would go up. It doesn't matter if the buzzer went off, it doesn't matter if the power was cut to the robot was going to go up. And so that was one of I think the best implementations of this kind of design. And the other notable team was our own 1771. Now, this is supposed to be a GIF here on the right, but it doesn't work. That's okay. And they actually had a pneumatic kicker, right? Now, 1771's definitely been, I think, a bit of a pioneer, especially back in those days when it came to doing things with pneumatics. And I think that season they really unlocked that, hey, we can kick the soccer ball better than almost everybody else with just pneumatics. And I think some of the concepts that they used that season would be used by Kel, would be used by 1261 mentors, I think almost 4 years later in their robot when they were launching the launching the big trackballs. So, a lot of these concepts, if you know these, you keep an eye on them going forward, right? So at the beginning, I also talked about the ranking system, right? And how it was sort of a little weird because it was based off the winning alliance's score. But what happens if you know you're going to lose, right? There's no way that you are playing there and 11-14 and 469 on the other side and you're going to lose, right? If your score is based on the winning alliance, if your ranking is based on the winning alliance's score, would you even play defense? Right? Would you even stop the winning alliance from just going all out if you know you're going to lose? And that's actually what happened in one of these matches, 11-16 versus 469 on Curie. 11-14 versus 469. 11-14 was, frankly, a little bit outgunned, right? Which 11-14 had a fantastic robot. It's not hard to outgun them. But when you have 469 and a couple of other decent robots, they were up against a difficult match. And so rather than fight it out, rather than play defense and things like that, 11-14 was like, no, we are going to play against ourselves. And I think this was like the highest scoring match. They scored like 30 goals total, right? And that was great for 11-14 because they got 30 points. They got 30 seeding points, right? So this was one of the weird things that, if you knew there was a match where you were going to get blown out or you were going to lose really bad, it was actually in your interest to not play defense. Do not try and slow the other team down. Actually get out of their way so that you can get those seeding points. So definitely a very, I think, a well-intentioned ranking system, but did not really pan out like that. So when we look forward, some of the things that people had taken out of this season, right? We have your shifting wheel modules, the Octanim modules that you can now buy. In 2010, that was the first time we'd ever seen that kind of build. If you think about like a game-breaking design, it's hard to have that discussion without talking about 469 and what they were able to do by really understanding the rules that year. And when it comes to Breakaway as a game, we haven't seen a ton of these components in sort of future games. So we haven't seen a soccer kind of approach. We haven't seen, sort of that like you have to climb a vertical bar kind of approach or like do like a pull-up climb, although we have seen some robots implement that here and there. So, it could be argued that this game is due, right? That, we haven't seen it in a while. First might bring back some of these components for future years. And so knowing this game might help you in 2021, might help you in the future. So it's good to know, it's good to study these things. Now, before I end and before I start taking questions, it's supposed to be a GIF, but the GIF doesn't work. This is actually, I don't know if any of you guys have seen the GIF of Dean Kamen being hit in the face with a soccer ball, but this is that game, this is that year. So here's our denim-clad angel. He's like standing there on the side, and I believe the blue robot's playing defense, and the red robots are trying to score. And the blue robot will pick up a soccer ball, and they're just trying to clear balls out of that zone. So they will pick it up, and they will just shoot it. And they picked it up, and they shoot it, and shot Dean Kamen in the face. And he wasn't wearing safety glasses, and it was a whole thing. So definitely, if you're not familiar with it, go check the GIF out. It's free. This is one of those things in FRC that are floating around. You can show it to your teammates, right? It's like, hey, have you seen this GIF of Dean Kamen being hit in the face with a soccer ball? Because it's awesome. Okay. Now, with that, that's the end of my presentation and the end of, kind of what happened in 2010. But there's so much more you can go and explore about just this year, right? Go look at what 11-14 created. Go look at other release videos. Go watch match footage about strategies and how teams were defending against 469. Those are all really interesting videos to watch. Okay. At this point, I don't have any questions. Or sorry, of course I don't have any questions. But at this point, I don't have anything else. So if you guys have any questions about this year, if you guys have any questions about anything in general, feel free to drop them in the chat. If not, you can head out and have a good day. All right.
We have an individual asks, which year did you see the most innovation in design?
Which year did I see the most innovation in design? It's a little difficult to say because I think each year people sort of coalesce around a few things. Honestly, I would say the year that I saw the most like creativity and innovation was 2019. So actually not that long ago. So just a couple of years ago with, having to deal with the hatches, having to deal with the different levels of climbs, the rockets, you like really needed vision. I think that was a year where teams got the most creative, right? Unfortunately, because this was 2010 and it was so long ago, a lot of the tools that teams nowadays use, like Vex Pro, a lot of the more powerful motors, a lot of the more accessible gearboxes, they just didn't exist. So it was difficult for teams to get super innovative unless you had a large number of resources at your disposal, right? So nowadays, I think we see a lot more creativity and innovation simply because the barrier for entry and barrier to do something creative is much lower. So you can build some really crazy stuff nowadays without too much money or without too much machining resources. All right. Okay. So it looks like not many more questions. Well, all right. So question from Brian: a 469 1114 lower the rules or don't try to win. How is that received in terms of gracious professionalism and being acceptable? That's a good question. I think so. I think the way it was received was generally positively, right? Nobody really cares. Nobody really cared that they were, trying to lower the rules or didn't want to push to win. I think some of that showed up in the rules at a later point in time. So I think nowadays there's like a rule in the rule book that you can't actively try to lose a match, right? So that kind of stuff is there. I generally get the sense that the FRC community is pretty positive on these types of actions, right? That if you can break the game, you are generally seen in a pretty positive light, right? And folks in the FRC community, they might be a little upset for like half a second, but then they'll go into their next event and they'll pull the same stunts, right? So like 69 had a few folks that copied them, right? And the copies were okay, but ultimately people were pretty impressed by the design. They were impressed by how it worked, and people were happy to see it, honestly. Will this session be posted on YouTube? I'd like to look back on it. It was pretty good. Thanks for the positive feedback. And yes, I believe all the symposium sessions will be posted on YouTube, right? And if the feedback is good, I'm actually considering, as a part of Peach Pit, to do this for other years, right? So I will drop my email into the chat. So if you guys have any questions or if there's another year that you would really like to see, drop me a note and let me know, and I can put some of those presentations and videos together as well. All right. All right, I think we're good to go. Jen, you can stop the recording and close this down.